January is a time of quiet beauty in my garden, but there's still plenty to do. Trees to plant, shrubs to move, and a greenhouse to tend to. But at least there I'll be warm. Now, any time between November and March is a good time to move deciduous shrubs, those that lose their leaves in winter because they're dormant. This is a deciduous shrub. It's going to be a good time to move it right now, but I've got to give it the best possible chance of survival. Before you crack on with the secateurs and the spade, just think, do I really need to move this plant? Would it be happier if I reduce the canopy overhead to let more light in? In this case, this rubus, a kind of ornamental raspberry with double flowers, is being overwhelmed by the growth from this rose over the top. It gets shaded out. So now is a good time to move it to a place where it will get more light. The first thing to do with any shrub, this included, is to reduce the top growth. If I dig it out with a reduced root system and expect it to support all this growth that was there when it had a larger root system, I'm asking a lot of it. I'm taking out some older wood and leaving a lot of younger wood, which I shall then shorten slightly. Old and gnarled, bit like me. There are some shrubs you can be really quite dramatic with. If you're moving Hydrangea Annabelle, which are the ones I had around there with the dead heads on now, they put on almost all that growth in one summer. You can risk cutting them right back down to the ground. So I'm trying to make the whole thing less dense and leaving enough young stems with promising buds on them, making every single cut just above a bud. If I were cutting this back, it would be there. And that's the same when you're pruning absolutely anything, then that will grow away and there's no stem left to die back. So there we are, fairly dramatic, but the growth that I've left is all young and vigorous. I've got to get it up now with enough root to allow it to be transplanted with not too much discomfort. So, how close? Fairly, but not too far away, otherwise you'll never be able to lift the root ball. I'm going in about 10 centimetres from the centre of the plant and seeing what happens. Now you're going to be cutting through roots, don't worry too much. As long as you're not too close to the plant, there'll be enough left. What I'm trying to do here, my kids used to say that to me when they were little, what are you trying to do, Daddy? I'm not trying, I'm doing it. What I'm doing here is cutting through as much root as I can, allowing that distance from the centre of the root ball, leaving a root ball which I can then lever out the ground. It's moving now. Now that I've got down, I'm starting to go under, but again not too close to the surface. You want to leave it a bit of anchorage, and it's not a race against time. Take your time. If it's a bit strenuous, have a breather, or as we used to say, have a blow in between. Coming now. And that's it. Now you can see how much root I've got with that. Quite a bit. What I want to try and do is to avoid losing much of that soil. Now this is quite a thorny shrub, being a relative of a raspberry. It's got those little tiny thorns on that get in your fingers, so now that I have to manhandle it, I'm putting a pair of gloves on. And the thing to do is to pull it over on one side, and this is burlap sacking hessian. You can use whatever you want, use a plastic sheet if you want, but I just happen to have this, and I'm going to ease it underneath, roll that over onto that side, and then pull that out underneath it. Now this is the strenuous bit, the bit where you hope the root ball isn't so big that you can't lift it. There we are. Not a grain of soil lost. So I come here now to where I have dug the hole in a lovely open spot, apple tree here, but we're facing south. It gets good light here, and I'm checking now I've dug the hole the right depth. Use your spade as a measure. That root ball is almost exactly the depth of one spade blade, and that's what your hole needs to be. Don't bury them too deeply or too shallowly. Look at that. There's a stroke of luck. I must have known. The thing to do now is to just enrich that ground a bit. Not too much, particularly if you're on heavy soil and you fill it full of organic matter. It'll act like a sump, and all the water from miles around will drain into it, and your shrub will drown. But by just ameliorating your earth with a bit of, in this case, rose tree and shrub compost, just to act as a bit of an encourager for those roots to come out. Bit of it in the bottom, work it in to that soil so it's not pure compost, and I've got a bit that will mix in with that earth as we return it. Now I've got to get this out and into there, keeping as much of that soil around it as possible, which is where this hessian is still going to come into its own. Just hanging on to it for now as I lift it forward out of there onto the edge of the hole, and then lowering it in, but taking that bit there off, pulling it out of the way, it out of the way, lowering that in, letting it go over the other way, pulling that out here without losing too much, then straightening it up. Look at that. You can see now that it's at the right level. And now I'm going to fill around it with the soil that came out mixed with that bit of compost, and then loosen that edge of the hole. The important thing is that there are no air pockets. That's why I'm pushing my spade down. And before you finish, give it a really good welly in. I've made sure that the root ball is nestling at almost exactly the same level as it was when I dug it up. I think that'll do it now. Watering, nothing much to worry about during the winter at all. It'll be plenty moist enough. The critical time for water is in spring when growth is starting. Don't let it dry out then, or it will struggle because its roots won't have got out very far, and to support all that new growth that's coming, it will be thirsty. You don't need to turn it into a paddy field, just make sure it doesn't dry out, and then, little shrub, you should do very nicely. A greenhouse is a great investment for your garden. It will extend the season at both ends, give you somewhere to potter even when the weather's foul, and grow lots of lovely plants. Extending the season means making it possible to sow seeds earlier in the year and then carry on growing things later in the year. And a greenhouse enables you to do just that. Where are you going to put it? Should it run north-south or east-west? I don't think it matters a fig, so long as the greenhouse itself is in an open, well-lit situation. And the advantage there is that plants don't have to seek out the light. Put a greenhouse in a shady spot and your plants will grow tall and spindly as they're reaching for the light. If it's brightly lit, they don't need to do that. Whatever material your greenhouse is made from, it must stand on solid, stable foundations. The manufacturers will advise some of them need more than others. Obviously a weighty greenhouse needs deeper foundations. Here, this one is built just on very stable paving and it's fastened to that paving and it's absolutely solid. Ask the manufacturer what they recommend. If you want to get started really early in the season, inside this greenhouse I have a little electric fan heater, which is why it's useful to have electricity piped to your greenhouse. I use it just to keep the temperature above freezing. You don't need to heat a greenhouse to tropical proportions. If you can keep the frost out and keep it heated to around 45-50 degrees, you can grow pelargoniums, geraniums. That's what I do with these. And they'll tick over through the winter quite happily. Only half the thing about a greenhouse is getting it warmed up. The vital thing in spring and summer is that you can cool it down, and you can do that with ventilation to allow hot air out. The biggest killer of plants in winter in a greenhouse, aside from plummeting temperatures, is fungus disease, botrytis, grey mould, and that thrives in a stagnant, damp atmosphere. So good air circulation, and in a mild day, opening the door, let the air come in, and the plants will thank me for it. I've got here a little plant factory. You'll see at the end here what looks like a cold frame. Well, it is a cold frame, but I brought this in from outdoors where it's just giving protection from the weather to use it as a propagating frame. I've put soil warming cables in sand at the bottom of it, and that means I can start seeds and seedlings in that case with the lid down several weeks in advance of being able to sow seeds outside. If you've no heating at all, a greenhouse is still really handy because you'll still be able to sow seeds in here without any heat at all, several weeks in advance of being able to sow them outside. So that's why this is my little treasure, and it's a wonderful way of having a little sanctuary in the garden if there are times when you just want to get out of the house. One thing that I think is essential to have in a greenhouse is guttering. We're all very conscious now of conserving water supplies, particularly in summer, and plants love rainwater. So these gutters catch the water down that little pipe and into a galvanised water butt here with a tap on it, so I can fill a watering can and make sure that I'm using rainwater for as much of the season as possible. When it comes to maintaining your greenhouse, winter is the most important time. Through the summer, you don't need to do too much, but in winter, you need to make sure that you get as much light transmission as possible. And that means cleaning the glass to get rid of all this green stuff. Through the year, gradually, mould and green algae builds up on the glass. Over the summer, it gets more and more opaque, the light transmission drops. You'll need a good stiff broom on the end of a handle, dip it in lightly soapy water, nothing too dramatic, and then just go up and down and up and down, getting rid of all that green. It's very satisfying, provided you can stop the water from running right the way down to your elbow. If you don't wash the greenhouse glass, you'll find that your plants don't get nearly so much light. They get tall, they get spindly while they're searching for it. So good light transmission is key. I'm doing the outside now because it's fair weather. The other thing you need to do is to clean the inside of the glass as well, particularly if the greenhouse is warm. Green algae will build up there as well. And when I finish doing this, I'll just wash off all this soapy sod water, and with it will come the green gunge, and every single plant growing in this greenhouse will say, "Oh, thank you, Alan." I've always loved houseplants in the home. They look good, they lift your spirits, and they cleanse the air. What's not to like? Here are 7 of my particular favourites. After a few years in the wilderness, houseplants are really back in vogue, and that thrills me no end. At number 7, a trailing plant. This is Zebrina pendula. It's a native of Mexico and Central America, and it's really good in a hanging pot like this. Or you can stand it on a shelf and let it cascade down in front. Just make sure it's got a modicum of light, because that way you'll get this lovely contrast of the stripes on the leaves of purple and grey-green. I grew this plant when I was a nipper, and one of the reasons I grew it was so easy to grow. You can nip off a shoot tip 3 or 4 inches long and root it in a jam jar of water. It is so easy to propagate. In terms of light, any good indirect light, it'll even cope with bright sunshine. But when it's hanging in midair in a pot like this, remember, because it's surrounded by air, particularly if it's warm, centrally heated air, it will dry out quite quickly. Just going to pop this one down there to bring in number 6, which is the dragon tree. Dracaena is its Latin name, native of Madagascar, places like that. And you'll notice with this, these lovely fountains of foliage at the top, which have this glorious stripe with this pink edge. And when it starts to get too tall, bite the bullet, cut it back down here somewhere. It will look ugly for a while, but very soon little bubbles of sprouting shoots will appear, and they turn into these extra heads of foliage. If you're putting a group of houseplants on the floor in a corner, this is a good one for the back, but also it's architectural in its own right. Slip this plastic pot into a nice outer container and you've got a really handsome feature. What it will enjoy, to avoid the tips of these leaves becoming brown, is a bit of atmospheric moisture, so try and keep it away from a radiator. And with all these plants, tin tray, bit of gravel, keep the gravel moist, stand the plant on the tray, and it'll have a little moisturising Turkish bath around it at all times if you can just keep the gravel damp. At number 5, a plant that is really difficult to kill. Now that's a challenge, isn't it? This is it. Sansevieria, the mother-in-law's tongue. I'm turning it because actually that's quite a good thing to do with houseplants. If they've got light coming from one angle, do turn them every couple of weeks to make sure, because they always grow to the light, and they grow more evenly. This is a glorious succulent from West Africa and parts of Asia, and because it's got very succulent leaves, that means it can cope with drying out. Again, the way to kill this is to overwater it to keep it soggy. Don't wait until the compost is really quite dry before you give it a soak, then don't go back until it's dry again. We take a lot of our house plants and garden plants for granted, but when we get up close and personal with them, we see they really are remarkably constructed, and this makes this enormous great flame of growth, loves really good light, so if you've got a sunny windowsill it can cope. And here the plastic pot is just dropped inside a cashpo, to give it its posh name, and it's also got plastic inside it, so that means it won't stain your furniture when you're watering it. It's an unfortunate common name, isn't it, mother-in-law's tongue, implying that all mother-in-laws have rather a sharp and waspish tongue. Not true of most. A real whopper coming now. This is the Kentia palm, or Howia. Hugely popular with the Victorians, the parlour palm they call it. It would stand in the corner of the room on something they called a whatnot. Really tolerant of low light levels, which were predominant in Victorian sitting rooms and parlours. So that's useful if you've got a room which isn't terribly well lit. Again, just once it's feeling dry at the top, give it a soak and then don't return with the watering can. What you can do is keep these leaves clean. Just get yourself a bit of kitchen roll or damp loo paper and wipe them, particularly in winter, because that way the low light that they can tolerate is increased a little bit. You'll see the amount of muck that comes off, and it's really useful to do that with any glossy leaved houseplant. And if you've got too near a radiator with it, you will find that the leaf tips here, the frond tips, start to go brown. So keep it away from a heat source. At number 3, a challenging plant. Not for the beginner, but incredibly spectacular. This is the fiddle leaf, Ficus lyrata. It has these whacking great leaves, shaped like, well, not exactly a Stradivarius, but you can see why it's called the fiddle leaf fig from the underside of that leaf there. It is shaped like a violin. It's glorious, absolutely lovely, but a bit tricky. It doesn't like changes of temperature and changes of light level, so once you've got it, try and keep it settled in the same place. Reasonably warm. It comes from West Africa, so it doesn't like really cold rooms. And like that Kentia palm, this is one that really does benefit for having these glossy leaves wiped over every now and again. You can see that this is a plant which grows in tropical rainforests. It has these massive great leaves to catch water, channel them down the stem to the roots, but also to make as much use as whatever light is available to it. So relatively low light levels, but I'd make sure it wasn't in too dark a place and that you keep it warm but not hot, warm but not cold. See what I mean about it being a bit tricky? But that said, it's a glorious plant and it will get really quite tall. It used to grow in a palm house at Kew where I worked, and I've always loved it. If you want something easier to grow, then plump for this. It hasn't made my top 7, but I feel a bit embarrassed now. The Swiss cheese plant. So called because, rather like Swiss cheese with holes in it, it has holes in its leaves. Monstera deliciosa. The juvenile leaves are entire, that means they're whole, without a hole. And then as they get older, so they develop holes in them like this. And if you want to have a competition with a friend to see who can grow the most monstrous monstera, it's really worth go. Very carefully put this down there while I bring in number 2, hugely spectacular. This is Calathea. Now there are lots of Calatheas and most of them have these gloriously marked leaves. It's a tricky plant. It likes it warm. It's very happy again in indirect light, so it's a classic good house plant for a central heated home. But don't let the air around it become too dry or you will get this browning of the leaf tips. A tricky one, another challenge, but we like challenges as houseplant growers. If we can give it warmth and we can give it humidity, it will be really very happy in quite reasonable light. So as a spectacular talking point, you'll find that you can create a little bit of jungle in the corner of your room with a calathea. What could possibly be more popular than that? Well, something that's much easier to grow and that is, I suppose, the most popular houseplant in the country. It's very tolerant of all kinds of conditions. This is it. Quite simply, the peace lily. You'll find it in corners of living rooms, of kitchens, of bathrooms, with varying degrees of success in terms of getting it to flower well and frequently. But when it is happy, you get these lovely white sail, and in the centre, the spadix, not to be confused with spandex, something quite different. It copes with relatively erratic watering, provided you don't overdo it and make it absolutely boggy and soggy at the bottom. It's a really good doer, a good all-rounder, and I love it when the new spathes erupt from the centre of the plant and you see them coming out in this glorious confection of green and creamy white. Again, it's a plant which benefits from turning. I always say every plant has a front and a back, and that's because, generally speaking, the front is the bit that's been leaning towards the light and the back has been leaning away. So this is a good example to remind you to keep turning a plant so that you get a good even spread of flowers and foliage. If you're going to go for one houseplant and take a punt on it to see how you get on, try the peace lily. If you follow those little tips and wrinkles, it shouldn't let you down. So if you don't have a garden, just look how green and bright and cheery your life can be in a single room. I feel here as though I'm sitting in the jungle, and I'm feeling better for it already. Houseplants. No home should be without at least 3. However small your garden, always make sure you've got at least 1 tree. Gardens need height. Here are my top tips to make sure you plant the right tree and that it thrives. The first thing to decide is which is the right tree for your garden. I've got 4 different options here. The first one is the beech tree. Now the beech, Fagus sylvatica, sylvatica meaning of woodland. There's a clue. It's a large tree, a huge stately tree. And when I say big, I mean big. This will make 20 or 30 metres. This is one to plant only if you have plenty of space, though you can of course plant a row and trim it to make a hedge. Beech hedges are delightful. Fresh lime green growth in spring, and through the winter this effect. This is called marcescence. It's when the tree's leaves crisp and dry, but they don't fall off. These will fall off when the new foliage starts to emerge in spring. Now you might think, oh, it looks a bit dead, but with the sun catching these leaves, it gives it an enormous winter interest. I planted an avenue of them up there when they were a little bit smaller than this, and you can see now in the middle of winter, it's a lovely feature, especially with the sun slanting through it. Next up, this one, the silver birch. Now, although it can get quite tall, it has a light and feathery canopy. It doesn't cast too much shade. And what it does have, when its leaves have all fallen in winter, is this glorious silvery bark. This is one called Betula utilis jacquemontii, and jacquemontii is the name to remember if you want a really good white bark. This is a tree for a medium-sized garden. If you've got a tiny garden and you want a birch, you can plant Young's weeping birch, which stays small and its branches come down. Personally, I don't like it very much, but if you like it and you want a birch, Young's weeping birch for a tiny garden, but jacquemontii for anything of reasonable size. From a tree which loses its leaves in winter to one which retains its leaves all year round. It's evergreen, the eucalyptus. Now this is an acquired taste and one to be very wary of. This is Eucalyptus gunnii, these glorious glaucous blue-grey round leaves, there as I say all the year round, but it will make a massive tree. Eucalyptus is very fast growing, really quite hardy in spite of the fact that it's from Australia. If you want to grow this because you love the foliage for flower arranging, you can chop it back hard every spring, right down to a foot or so, and it will sprout from the base. But if you've got a smallish garden, the best thing to do is to find a tree which will never eat you out of house and home. Like this one. This is a weeping, winter flowering cherry. And if you look at these stems here, they come down off this slender tree and they're already peppered with flowers in the middle of January. The smaller cherries are really useful, and the winter flowering cherry, which will pop its little blooms out from these tiny little buds through several weeks in the winter, give you a bit of winter interest. Check the height and the habit of the flowering cherry before you buy it, and think too about the flowering crab apples, a really good race for small gardens. The most important thing, of course, is where you're going to plant your tree. I've got the perfect spot for that beech tree. Winter is a great time to plant trees, any time between November and March, particularly for bare root trees that have been dug up to be transplanted. Container grown trees like this beech, you can plant at any time of year, but I still think it's great to get tree planting done as soon as you possibly can before spring, so it's got a chance to settle in, get its roots growing and grow away when the warmer weather comes. This is the spot I'm choosing. There's been a frost, but it's only on the surface and it's going now. Don't plant if the ground is either waterlogged and sodden or frozen solid. Other than that, in winter, it's fine. Now I've got a very pleasant winter's day to dig my hole for this particular tree. How big? Well, just about 1 metre wide. I'm digging a circular hole here. You'll hear people saying trees should be planted in square holes. Believe me, the roots of this tree can't tell whether that hole is circular or square. Just dig a decent size hole that's about 20-30 centimetres bigger all the way around than the root ball, and then skim the grass off and then dig your hole. Well, it's warmed me up digging that hole. How deep? Well, check with your spade or your fork how deep the root ball is. Look, it's just fractionally more than the prongs of my fork. And you're planting always at the same level as the plant is growing in the pot. Don't plant too deep. A lot of things don't like that at all. So that's about how deep the root ball is. You can see the hole is a little bit more than that, and I'm breaking up the bottom because sometimes you get a real dense layer below which the roots don't want to penetrate, and then I can adjust with soil when that goes in to get it to the right level. Now, when it comes to planting in the middle of winter, at this time it's more interested in the texture of the soil that's surrounding it rather than any nutrients it contains. And that means ameliorating the soil itself with something like this rose tree and shrub mixture, because this, the goodness that you can feel in your hands, is the goodness that those roots will enjoy. Sprinkle it generously in the bottom of the hole, and then around the soil at the sides. This one is specially formulated for tree and shrub planting. The important thing is it's organic. The goodness is what you can feel. So any kind of soil improver or well-rotted garden compost you can use, and then fork that bit that I put in the base of the hole just into the surface so it's mixed in with the soil. And then we have a sort of magic ingredient that's come to the fore in the last few years. We've learnt so much about how trees in particular live at their roots with mycorrhizal fungi. They're associated with this great network of fungi below ground. And all plants use good fungi, if you like, and good bacteria to grow well, in the same way that those yogurts are good for our gut. For a 10-litre pot like this one, it says 1 sachet. That's the entire thing. And it's a sort of granular powder, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And the mycorrhiza, these beneficial fungi, are all in there. Sprinkle it into the bottom though. It says 1 sachet for a 10-litre pot, so it's all going in there. I'll give a little bit on the outside just for good measure. There it goes. That's in. Slightly work it in, but not too far, because you want the roots to come into contact with it. And then, gloves back on. Let's get the tree out of the pot. Now, this time of year, there's little problem with a root ball being dry. You always want to plant with a really moist root ball. If you're in any doubt at all, soak it. What do you see? You see a lot of roots going round and round and round. So we tease the roots. This does not mean saying, nary, nary, no, not that sort of teasing. The sort of teasing out of that root ball. Look, they're already beginning to venture out. Isn't that exciting? Into the earth that we've enriched with organic matter and provided with mycorrhizal fungi that say, hey, this is a really good home for you now. And, you know, people talk about, should you talk to trees? Should you talk to plants? There's no harm to talk to them, because while you're talking to them, you're looking at them and you're observing and you're seeing what might help them. And in this case, it's helping those roots to come out from that root ball. You can almost hear it sighing, can't you? Oh, thank you, Ellen. So now we have a root ball which is no longer smooth but distinctly fluffy, and it's been given the okay to spread sideways. And this is fairly critical, because you now need to measure to make sure we're going to get it at exactly the right level after planting. Into the hole. Now look at that. Absolutely perfect. And the way to test it is to run the stake across the soil. There we are, perfect. The right level. Now you can start backfilling, mixing your compost with the soil. Just do a little bit to give it stability to start with, and then before you go too far, check that it's perpendicular, it's straight up. There's nothing worse than finishing your planting, standing back and finding that your tree's leaning at an angle. Pull it back in, breaking it down, mixing it in, but very soon putting, not your welly, because I've got these really big stout gardening shoes I use, firming it in. Now there it is. If it's a sheltered spot, that would be fine. This has got quite a lot of windage on it. By that I mean these leaves will resist wind and it will rock in the wind. The wind in this country generally, the prevailing wind, is from the southwest. The southwest is exactly where you are. So what I want to do is to put a stake in which will help it resist those southwesterlies coming from there. And the way to do that is not to do as I used to do, stick a stick straight up like that, but to do it at an angle of 45 degrees and to do it facing into the prevailing wind, so that when the wind blows it pulls the tree and pushes the stake into the ground rather than trying to pull it out. That'll do. You can use all kinds of things to fasten the tree to the stake. So I use a proprietary tree tie, not easy word to say that. It has a buckle and this spacer here. Put it round the tree and you'll notice I'm staking this quite low down. I'm anchoring the important bit, which is the root system, so that doesn't wobble around. So fasten the tie around the tree and then around the stake. Tight enough but not too tight, and keep checking it over the months just to make sure that it's not got too tight. The spacer is really important because it stops the tree from chafing against the stake and wounding itself on the bark. My last job on this one, because I want this to be a handsome standard tree here, is to get rid of these little branches at the base. Take the secateurs and just snip them off really close to where they're coming out. And that's it. Job done. But the thing I was told as an apprentice gardener that I must always do when I've planted a tree, you turn to it, you look at it fondly and you say, "Grow, you bugger, grow." If you're looking for gardening tips like this, why not subscribe to my channel? You'll find ways of improving your garden, whatever its size, every week.